Thank you, everyone, and a very good morning to you. I'd also like to thank by starting the Seoul Municipal Government and all of Lucy for having me here. I believe this is the first time that a Vivid Sydney representative has spoken officially in Korea and possibly even for a Lucy conference like this. So it's a very big honour and I'm very grateful. Thank you. Can I just see if anybody in the room has ever been to Vivid Sydney? Maybe hands up. Has anyone been? Oh, great. Okay. So we've got probably maybe 6 or 7. Who would like to go to Vivid Sydney? Okay, well, I better do a really good job today. Today, I'm going to share with you just an overview, really, of Vivid Sydney, some history, how the event has progressed and developed, some new initiatives, a little bit about Vivid Sydney's sustainability, because we're asked quite a lot about how the event attempts to be sustainable, given its size and scale, and, of course, Vivid Sydney 2025 and beyond, what the future holds. So looking at a very brief history of Vivid Sydney, the event started in 2009, so it's really not that old. And I should point out right from the beginning that Vivid Sydney is owned, operated and managed by the government of New South Wales. Now, New South Wales is the state that Sydney is within, the capital city of New South Wales. And it's managed through an organisation called Destination New South Wales, which interestingly for an event of this size is the state government's major tourism and major event agency. So my client, if you like, is Destination New South Wales or the New South Wales government. So back in 2009, Vivid Sydney was founded, and this is the very first light installation on Sydney Harbour Bridge, which when you see some of the other photos or the photo before, it's pretty kind of average now, but was a huge deal back then because it had never been done before. But back in 2009, Vivid Sydney was instigated really because we needed to build tourism in the winter months of Sydney. And our winter is May, June, July, so different in other parts of the world, I know, but it was very, very slow for tourism, and the mantra was heads on beds. So to get people to come, tourists to come from all around the world and from other parts of Australia, how can we do it? And Vivid Sydney was born. The other main reason it was instigated was to showcase Sydney as the creative hub of the Asia Pacific, to really show off the creativity of Sydney. In its first year, there were 25 light sculptures through the Central Business District, and really around the parts of Sydney that you would probably know from all of the postcards you've seen. So around the Sydney Opera House, the Sydney Harbour Bridge and things like that. And in its first year alone, it generated $10 million in economic benefit. So it was very clear right from the very first year that this event had something going for it. This is one of the very early projections onto the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And again, you'll see as we progress how sophisticated these have become. By 2016, Vivid Sydney increased from 2 weeks to 23 nights due to demand. The crowds were so huge that we extended to 23 nights. And in that year, 2016, so only 7 years since it started, there was a 25% increase, so up to 2.3 million people attended the event. So you'll start to see this pattern of ever-increasing crowds. And it continues to break attendance records pretty much year on year. In 2021, I joined. I often think it's 2022 because in 2021, I joined as festival director and my whole year involved dealing with COVID and an event this size. So we ended up postponing twice and then finally cancelling. The event was cancelled in both 2020 and 2021. So in 2022, we did the first festival under my directorship, and one of the things that I introduced was a theme each year. And I did this for two reasons. Firstly, to give our audience a better experience so that there was a narrative, a story, a sense of meaning behind the reason why these installations, sculptures, etc., projections were there. It's more than putting beautiful things in beautiful places, to give people a sense of cohesion. And the other reason was that artists responded to it really well. It gave them a sense of direction and a sense of purpose. Now, many people might think that Vivid is just a light show. It's not. We have three other pillars, which I'll talk about in more detail, but important to note now that music, ideas and Vivid food are also part of Vivid Sydney. So in 2022, and this work actually I should point out is by an artist called Ken Doan, who many of you may have heard of, extremely famous Australian artist, international artist, and I asked him to do Custom's House because he's so much a part of the fabric of Sydney, and this really heralded, I guess, a new direction, which I'll talk about in a moment, but about collaborating with artists that are not necessarily known as light artists. So in 2022, we had our biggest year yet with 2.58 million people over 23 nights. In 2023, the theme was Vivid Sydney Naturally. Naturally, why? Because Sydney is very much about the natural environment, and we're very passionate about the natural environment. And I really believe that successful events are events that are very much connected with place and people. Vivid Sydney wouldn't be Vivid Sydney if it wasn't in Sydney. It's about using the natural environment and using the urban environment, which sort of collides with the natural environment in Sydney, to our advantage, and to really show off our creativity and our artists. So Vivid Sydney Naturally ran again over 23 nights, and that was the year last year that we introduced Vivid Food, and its first year had over 150,000 patrons to Vivid Food events. It was a bit of a non-brainer to introduce Vivid Food. Vivid's a nighttime event. We have a fabulous food culture in Sydney, and it was a way of really promoting New South Wales produce and chefs and our whole cooking culture. We also introduced the longest light walk ever in 2023 with 8.5 kilometres of light installations and projections around Sydney Harbour. I should point out too that in 2023 we had our biggest crowd ever, and that was 3.5 million people. So a bit of an anomaly, that one, but we had balmy weather. It was almost like summer, and people just came out of the woodwork, I think, 2 years after COVID. So 2024, this year, our theme was humanity, which I thought was a very natural or logical step from Vivid Sydney Naturally the year before. I was interested in the human condition, in our responsibilities as human beings, and artists and audiences really gravitated towards this theme. This year, we had the rainiest Vivid on record, 300 mils of rain in 23 nights. So you can imagine that was not only really hard work, but did keep some people away. We had about 2.5 million people this year. So let's talk about some new initiatives that have been brought into the event over the last few years. I'm a big collaborator, not just with other organisations, but amongst artists and amongst media. So this is a really great example of that. This work is called Elemental. It's in Cockle Bay at Darling Harbour, if any of you are familiar with Sydney. And it really, I think, illustrates what happens when you get a pyrotechnician, a projectionist, an animator, a director like me, a water screen expert, and a lighting designer together in a room. They come up with something like this. This played on rotation. It was about an 8-minute long show every night of the festival, and was extremely popular and voted by our audience the most popular installation of the festival. Looking at other initiatives that we brought in, now there's nothing new anymore about a drone show, but before this drone show, which was called Written in the Stars, which was last year in 2023, Vivid had only done 1 or 2 drone shows, and usually quite commercial ones. This was the first time we did, I guess, an artistic drone show with a story. It was all about, the theme was naturally for the festival, so this was all about our natural skies and what happens above us. It was a 1,100 drones, which was a lot in those days, I believe. So I think China's just done 8,000 drones or something like that. But it's amazing to watch a drone show with a backdrop like Sydney Harbour, and was incredibly successful. So successful that we did 7 shows and had over 500,000 people see the drone show. It's almost become too popular, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Works of scale are also something that I'm really interested in for an event like Vivid. I have nothing against smaller works, but I often think with a festival of the scale of ours and the huge footprint of ours, that sometimes smaller works can get lost. This work, Nest, by Leela Jeffries, who's an Australian photographer, was set in a 9-metre diameter projection scrim, if you like, so you could walk inside and be completely immersed by it and see it from the outside. So wherever you looked at it, you got quite a different experience because it played with shadows and duplication and things like this. And this was really about our relationship, humans' relationship with the environment, and it featured some beautiful photography of Australian birds and also an original composition. It was an audience favourite, that's for sure. And I think people now come to Vivid expecting those kind of works of scale. This is another one that some people might have seen, by the Green Isle in Berlin. They're from Berlin. And our audience were able to film their eyes in a little projection, in a little camera box just below this, and then look up and see their eyes projected onto a building that sort of overlooked a vast amount of the event. And I'm always keen to try and involve our audience as much as we can. We hear the word immersion being thrown around quite a lot, or interactive being thrown around quite a lot. But this really was our audience looking down on the event, and people just loved it. Also, got a technical issue. Also looking at works of scale by our partners. And I'm happy to say here in Korea that Samsung and Kia are 2 major partners of Vivid and have been on and off for many, many years. And the installation you see in the background with Galaxy AI there is the Samsung installation this year, and a magnificent work of scale, and they worked with an Australian artist to create this. So these are the kind of relationships we have with our partners who really get involved in the spirit of the event and really produce some amazing work that, apart from the signage, you wouldn't really know it was a partner installation. We're also always looking for new venues and new audience experiences, so new ways for our audiences to experience venues that they know very well or think that they know very well. And one of our hugest successes of this year was a work called Techno Train that was set in your normal train that went around the city circle, but it was completely transformed for Vivid Sydney. 4 carriages with lighting design and an original composition by Paul Mack, who's a very well-known Sydney-based composer. Each show went for about 20 minutes, and there were 3 different routes that you could take, and it sold out 16,000 tickets in 4 days. Hugely successful, and I think a really fun element to add to Vivid Sydney, and certainly one that we're thinking of doing again. Some other new initiatives that I've brought to the festival are, as I mentioned before, collaboration. I was very interested in looking at working with artists who didn't consider themselves to be light artists. So painters, sculptors, photographers, really artists from all sorts of mediums who were interested in working in light but had never done it before and felt that it was kind of too technical or too difficult. Reg Mombassa, some of you might know the Mambo brand, which is a very famous Australian clothing brand. He's a very well-known painter, a gallery painter, and we collaborated with him this year to create a projection on Customs House. He had never done anything like this before, and he worked with animators Spin Effects to go through 3,500 paintings of his and come up with a 7-minute narrative-based story on Customs House, which our audience loved because it's iconic. His work is iconic in Australia. Guan Wei, a very well-known Sydney-based Chinese-born Australian artist, similar story, did a beautiful work on the Museum of Contemporary Art. And no introduction needed for this building, but the Sydney Opera House this year featured our Archibald Prize-winning artist Julia Gutman, who works in fabrics and worked with animators to create a beautiful show on the Sydney Opera House. So really not completely moving away from traditional light artists, but really experimenting with other kinds of medium, here in this case fabric, painting, photography, to try and create new ways of seeing what light can do, and really bringing, I think, new experiences to our audiences. Of course, the Sydney Harbour Bridge is a main feature of Vivid Sydney, and we experiment with this all the time, although they're very expensive experiments when you're working at this scale. But I'm very happy to share with you that Mandy Lights, an Australian company who have been working on the bridge since I became festival director, have now become world-renowned in terms of the lighting installations and the lighting design that they do. And they first started to work with Vivid Sydney, I think they had maybe 10 staff. They've now got offices in 4 countries around the world and do not only the Sydney Harbour Bridge, but major works in major capital cities all around the world. And we think that's part of our job, is to really present, Australian and Sydney creativity to the world, as well as welcome international artists to Vivid Sydney. I mentioned earlier that that food is now part of Vivid Sydney and has become, in only 2 years, an extremely successful part of Vivid Sydney. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's a nighttime event. We have a great food culture. It's winter. People want to eat, and Vivid Food has really been embraced by our audiences really, really well. We did over 50 individual events this year, including the Fire Kitchen that you can see a photograph of now. The Fire Kitchen is really our entry level, if you like, Vivid Food experience. It's a celebration of barbecue and the cultures that use fire, which means it's an international celebration of food. It's outdoors, lots of flames, lots of barbecue, and a lot of fun. And we welcome international pitmasters who do cooking demonstrations and things like that, and really share the art of cooking with fire with our audiences. We also have very high-end food experiences. We've brought out Daniel Hum, the chef from 11 Madison in New York, and his whole kitchen in 2023 to take over a kitchen in Sydney. Also very popular but very expensive, and a lot of local restaurants get involved in Vivid Food, which really bolsters the nighttime economy, which is part of why we do the event, to really help bring Sydney to life at night. Vivid Music is also a major part of Vivid itself, and has been since the very beginning. There are 2 parts to Vivid Music. One is a free 23 nights of free music on Tumbalong Park, which is in the middle of our light walk, and extremely successful. And we did a K-pop night this year, which was one of the most successful nights that we've done. We brought over Korean performers, and we often celebrate on this stage the international flavour of Sydney, so multicultural music nights and a lot of interactive music nights here on Tumbalong Park. The Sydney Opera House and a venue called Carriage Works also offer music, so it's a vast program and celebrates music from all around the world and from all genres. Vivid Ideas is also an important part of Vivid Sydney and covers a whole range of experiences, including talks from world-renowned talent. This year we had Amy Poehler speak. Last year Jennifer Coolidge and Mike White from The White Lotus. We've had Spike Lee. We've had numerous very well-known creatives from around the world come and do major major talking engagements. We do conferences, panel discussions, but in the last couple of years, we've been really interested in going beyond the panel discussion, beyond the talks, and really looking at new ways of how to articulate ideas. And this one is Restless Dance Theatre from Adelaide that we presented at Vivid Sydney this year. They're a dance company made up of dancers of different abilities, and the work was really amazing in terms of how it articulated, without really even saying anything, the whole idea of what people with different abilities can achieve. This is another example of vivid ideas and going beyond panel talks. There is a word in English, and this will be very interesting for the interpreter, called scriptocoprophilia. See, I can hardly say it, which is the innate need when you walk past somebody's window to look inside what's going on. And we all do it. We all love to peer in other people's windows. And so rather than have a talk about that or or a panel discussion, a group from Sydney did a work called window dressing, where there were performances in windows on the light walk throughout the festival. And sometimes there were 8 windows lit up, at other times there was only 1. And there was a non-verbal narrative that you could follow if you stayed there for long enough. So we're very interested, or I am very interested, in other ways of how we can articulate events, and also other ways of blending those pillars. This involved light, it involved ideas, it had a musical soundtrack. So not just light on its own. I'd just like to spend a little bit of time talking about sustainability. It's something that we're asked a lot about at Vivid Sydney, given the size and scale of our event. We approach sustainability really in 4 main ways. We're obviously promoting creative sustainability, minimising the event's environmental impact, promoting social inclusivity, and delivering a sustainable event experience. Creative sustainability, we believe that art at Vivid Sydney serves a really powerful tool to raise awareness and change hearts and minds about environmental and other issues. We certainly don't do it in a didactic way, but it is within the event. And when we integrate sustainability into artistic expression, the festival underscores the role of art in inspiring positive change and encouraging eco-conscious behaviours. By use of, and a lot of our artists approach sustainability in that way as well. We also work with charity partners like the World Wildlife Foundation last year and Médecins Sans Frontières this year, who work with us to try and promote their message as well to our vast audiences. One of Vivid Sydney's prerequisites is that the works are an Australian premiere, but after they've premiered at Vivid Sydney, we encourage artists to use them in festivals elsewhere. That prevents them from going into the bin or being scrapped and a whole lot of waste. So as you can see, over the last few years when we've instigated this, in 2023, for example, nearly 80% of those installations were used by other festivals around the world, preventing a significant amount of waste. Sensory considerations, social inclusion, I should say, is a key driver for Vivid Sydney. We want our event to be accessible to everyone. Everyone is welcome at Vivid Sydney, regardless of ability, socioeconomic status, or cultural identity. In terms of sensory considerations, we do things like sensory-friendly viewing areas, quiet rooms. We categorise installations by sensory impact, and we are always working on what's new, what's interesting, what will help those with sensory considerations have a better time at Vivid Sydney. Technology solutions using digital tools like interactive maps and accessible website features to enhance accessibility, and of course inclusive programming, and I've shown you some of it already, but along with that, using diverse performers, providing content in accessible formats like sign language and audio descriptions is also something we find really works very well for our audience. So what about the future? Well, our theme for next year, 2025, is Vivid Sydney Dream. Dreams are ageless, they're borderless, they're free, and everyone dreams. So we're really interested in hearing what artistic interpretations we can present next year along the theme of dreams. Dreams also can start movements and spark change. It can be read in so many ways, and I believe good themes are themes that can be interpreted in a variety of different ways. We're continually refreshing and revitalising the program. Each year we throw everything up in the air and see where it lands. We try and bring new things in, new activations, new events, new artists, new venues, always interested in, looking at using venues in different ways. We love people to see their city in a completely different way. We want audiences to come back because they know that there's going to be something new and something exciting and something different. We don't want people to say, Vivid, I've seen that. We want them to be engaged and have a new experience every time they come. We want to create connected, holistic, immersive and surprising experiences for our audience to hopefully get repeat and growth attendance from the previous year. We want to tell new stories to new audiences. I think Vivid Sydney shows a utopic moment when for 23 days we shine a light on Sydney and its people. It is about collaboration, celebration, community and very much about place. It is a fun, light, fun city. So my dream is to welcome you in 2025 to Vivid Sydney, and we'll finish with just a video that hopefully will encourage you to come. Thank you.
Foreshore is about to be illuminated.
Our beautiful harbour city coming to life.
Australia's biggest celebration.
As the 14th year of Vivid gets underway.
Lights on!
Huge round of applause for our fire show.
Thank you very much once again for having me. Thank you.